I've been getting a bunch of questions about the gear that I've been using out on the road with Suhr for the past year, so today we're doing a bit of a deep dive into the guitars, pedals, amps, or lack thereof, I should say, that have been getting the job done for me, and a little bit about the reasoning behind each of those choices. So if you've seen any of the other videos on my channel, you probably know that I'm a huge fan of big analog 100-watt tube amps and cabs. But when you start doing a bunch of fly dates and European tours and things like that, and you're trying to travel somewhat light, there's something really nice about having a fully self-contained rig that's gonna be consistent night after night, fits in my suitcase and all that. So, like so many other folks out there, I'm using the Quad Cortex from Neural DSP. I've been using their plugins since they were first released, and I love the sounds that I've been able to get out of them and the workflow. So transitioning to the Quad Cortex for building presets and scenes has been super logical to me. And while I adore using real amps and pedals through a real cab on stage, and ultimately that is my preference, once you're on in-ear monitors, the difference becomes a lot more negligible to me because the sound source that you're hearing is either the mic'd up sound of a cab coming into your in-ears or a direct sound coming into your in-ears. So it really kind of blurs the lines of what's better than the other. So at that point, it all comes down to feel for me. And there's a few little tips and tricks of things you can do in the Quad Cortex to get you closer to that feel. So first things first, here's the board itself. I've got the Quad Cortex, an Ernie Ball volume pedal, and the Dunlop 95Q wah pedal all mounted on the Warwick rock board. And it's all powered by the Chalk's DC7, which has been super handy since it works at all international voltages. So I've got the volume pedal and the wah pedal in the loop of the Quad Cortex, and the reason for this is that live we're using the Suhr Axient wireless system, and this setup frees up the XLR input of the Quad Cortex, and it just makes things a lot easier for big stages and long cable runs and snakes and all that stuff. It keeps your signal intact when you're using an XLR cable over long distances as opposed to like a 1/4 inch input. So I could use an adapter going into the volume pedal, but it just makes things a lot easier this way. So when it comes to modelers, you could argue that this is a positive or a negative, but I've often found them to be kind of overwhelming due to this endless list of amplifiers and effects. And more often than not, you'll find yourself tweaking sounds as opposed to actually playing music. So in recent years, I've really tried to simplify my approach to modelers and treat them a bit more like how I would do things in the analog realm with a stereo rig. So let's jump in this preset and I'll show you how I have things laid out. So to quickly blast through everything in here from the top, I've got the effects loop with the volume and wah that's always on, the diamond compressor, an Ibanez tube screamer, an exotic BB preamp, the Vemuram Jan Ray, MXR Phase 90, the stock tremolo from the QC, an MXR Univibe. Then the signal jumps down to row 3 and hits the amp, which in this case is the Mesa Boogie Lone Star set on the edge of breakup. And now this is where the signal splits into stereo. So you can kind of think of it like a studio situation where if you mic'd up an amp and then sent that mic'd up signal into some lush stereo processing. So after the Mesa Boogie Lone Star, the signal then hits a stereo impulse response where I'm using 2 IRs that I made. On the left side is the Suhr 212 with creambacks, and on the right side is my 412 cab with vintage 30s. I've got a healthy amount of the brash and brittle top end rolled off to 8.5K, and I'll play with this high cut a fair amount depending on what kind of sounds I'm going for. Also, I tend to voice things a little bit on the darker side because in my experience, I've found that it's easier for a front of house engineer to kind of brighten up your sound a little bit than it is for them to try to remove a bunch of harshness and brashness. And also if you're on in-ears, it's nice to have like a bit smoother sound in your ears. Then the signal hits an EQ to clean up some low mids at 500 Hertz. And next up is the TC2290 chorus for that wide stereo chorus sound, a little bit of slapback delay, a longer stereo analog delay, and a big plate reverb. And last up is a much shorter and subtle reverb called ambience that I find makes the guitar much nicer to play when using in-ear monitors to just give you the tiniest amount of space and depth. I'm controlling this all through 8 different scenes, which gets me through about 80% of our set, and using scenes is awesome because there's no latency when you switch between sounds, and you can control a ton of different parameters and which effects are on and off and where certain knobs are set and things like that, all with a single foot switch button press, and it's really handy if you're playing and singing at the same time and you're not trying to do that whole pedalboard tap dance thing. All right, so scene number 1 is called Dry. It's a touch-sensitive, cleanish sound. You'll notice I've got the tube screamer turned on, and this is to kind of narrow and focus the tone a bit. Some guitars more than others have a really extended top end and a ton of low end, so the tube screamer just kind of focuses things a bit, helps the guitar sit in the mix, and it doesn't step on the vocal as much. But depending on your guitar, if you're playing around with this, try it with the tube screamer on and off and see what you like best. The next scene is edge chorus, and I use this for that wider 80s thing right on the edge of breakup, and the chorus coming from the 2290 sounds really cool in your in-ears for that wider sound. The next scene is called Ambient Drive, and this is maybe one of my favorite sounds in this preset. It's super fun to get lost in probably too much delay and reverb, but it sounds awesome in a big venue. It also has the tube screamer turned on to try to focus and narrow the sound a bit. It's just a bit brighter and brash without it turned on, so play around with it and see what you like best. The next scene is called Slap Drive, which uses a BB preamp into the front of the Lone Star and a mono slapback delay after the amp. After that, we've got two scenes called Trem Mellow and Trem Drive, and I've been getting really into tremolo over the past couple years to the point that I might add an external tremolo to this board, but using a trem is just a really cool way to add some movement to your rhythm playing. Next up is my lead sound, which I'm using a BB preamp, the Janray overdrive, a bit of phase 90, some stereo chorus, and a healthy amount of analog delay and reverb. And for this sound, I'm going for a bit of like a mid-forward kind of thing, which on its own might sound a little honky, but it really helps to cut through in a live mix.
Don't wait, don't you wait, don't wait until tomorrow.
And the last sound in this preset is called Wash, and I mainly use this for dramatic effect and to really open up the stereo image at a few key moments during the set. But all in all, it's just a lush ambient sound that's fun to get lost in. So I'm using 4 different guitars on this gig, and first up is the Fender Bruno Mars Signature Strat. Originally, I got this guitar just because I liked the aesthetic of it, but it's really turned out to be one of my favorite Strats that I've ever played. The pickups in it sound amazing, it plays buttery smooth, the neck profile is awesome, it stays in tune really well, so I use this for all of our E standard songs in the set. Next up is this Suhr Classic S Vintage Limited Edition, and it's another killer sounding Strat, but I needed a guitar with a humbucker in the bridge for a couple tunes that have some higher gain parts like Killer and Bring It On. And if you know anything about Suhr's build quality, they're crazy nice guitars. So roasted maple neck, this one has nickel frets on it, pickups that sound amazing, and a bridge humbucker that actually splits into a usable sound. So just really nice attention to detail on these guitars. Then we got this gorgeous new PRS Studio, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite guitars. It's such a Swiss Army knife of a guitar, and it works in so many different situations. I think of it like a HSS Strat kind of thing on steroids, but the narrow field pickups that are in the neck and middle on this guitar are kind of like throaty P90s. And the bridge humbucker in this guitar is one of my favorite humbuckers that I've tried. It also splits into a really usable tap sound, which is a rarity, I find. The PRS trem is one of my favorite trems out there, and it's just been completely rock solid. I'm a bit of a stickler for having guitars that play with really low action, and I've never adjusted the truss rod once on this guitar, so PRS build quality is pretty untouchable in my opinion. For acoustic, I'm using this new LR Baggs AEG1, and it's really simplified my approach to acoustic guitar live. It's pretty easy to get a great sound out of this guitar, so I'm just running direct into the Quad Cortex with a little bit of compression, some delay, and reverb. I also just made a full review of this guitar that's live over on Premier Guitars channel, so definitely check that out if you get the chance. And lastly, for in-ears, I'm using the Jerry Harvey Audio Roxannes. These are crazy nice custom molded in-ears that are warm, smooth, and have a ton of detail to them. And as much as I love using wedges live to kind of feel the excitement and energy of the room, I find that I can pitch my vocals way better when I'm using these in-ears, so I'll take all the help I can get in that department. So if you're trying to be precise, these have been really helpful for me. So there it is, that's all the gear that I've been using out on the road, and it's really been working out great. I've been loving the workflow and simplicity of the Quad Cortex, and in all the live recordings that I've heard back, it sounds awesome. But like all guitar players out there, I will probably change things up in the future. I might go back to amps and a pedal board just because there's something undeniably fun about that setup, but we will see when the time comes. I've made this preset available for free on the Cortex Cloud, so feel free to check it out, and hopefully there's some sounds in there that you'll find useful, and be sure to let me know if you dig it. Unfortunately, you can't share impulse responses on the cloud, so I've made this preset with a stock IR as well that sounds great and it gets you right in the ballpark. I've also listed all the gear that I'm using in the video description, so if you're in the market, check those out and it definitely helps me out. If you have any questions about anything in this setup, just go ahead and leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get to those. I really appreciate you checking out the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.